This is a CBC podcast. It's more than just stats. It's the business that athletics play in our culture. The series Q on Sports features the brightest minds and the most influential figures in the sporting world. Browse interviews, read the blog, and more. Go to cbc.ca/Q.
Hello, I'm Stuart McLean, and this is the Vinyl Cafe. Well, this is a time of great tradition, the darkest time of the year in this northern part of the world, a time when traditions run deep. We've many ways of honoring the season: burning the Yule log, lighting the Hanukkah candles, pouring the Unity Cup. In the French region of Provence, people celebrate with 13 desserts. Yep, you heard me, 13. One for each of the 12 apostles, the 13th for Jesus. Each family has their own tradition surrounding which desserts are served. They set them out on Christmas Eve and leave them set until December the 27th. And when they eat them, they call it le gros souper, or the big supper. No kidding. In Britain, instead of mailing their letters to Santa, many kids throw their letters into the fireplace so they'll float up the chimney and fly to the North Pole. Of course, in the UK, the letters are usually addressed to Father Christmas, not Santa. In Australia, where my parents grew up, it's warm on Christmas Day, and the tradition, I've been told, is to take Christmas dinner to the beach. Because it's warm there on Christmas Day, there's also a lovely tradition called carols by candlelight. People gather outside in parks or squares, each person holding a candle, and together they sing Christmas carols. People have been gathering at the Sidney Myer Music Bowl in Melbourne to sing carols and light candles for 75 years. In Mexico and Guatemala, people go door to door carrying candles and singing as if they were pilgrims looking for lodging. It's called Las Posadas, a 9-day festival with a different family hosting the celebrations each night. In the Peruvian Andes, in the province of Chumbivilcas, they celebrate with a giant mass brawl. Everyone gets together and they beat each other up. Honest, there's a documentary on YouTube. And here, in the small but mighty kingdom of the Vinyl Cafe, we have our traditions too. They started the year that Dave cooked the family turkey. And in case you're wondering, yes, we're going to tell that story, but that's next week on the show. Today, we're going to celebrate the season with a story about Canadian Christmas traditions. It's a story about Dave's neighbors, Rashida and Amir Chuddery, new Canadians who remind some old Canadians about the magic of this season. We're going to play that story later in the show. Time now for the Vinyl Cafe Story Exchange. Well, you know how this works. This is the part of the show where you send us your stories. They have to be true stories and they have to be short, but after that, they don't have to be anything at all. After that, it's up to you. We promise we'll read everything you send us, and we promise we'll read some of our favorites here on the radio. If we choose to read your story on the radio, we promise we'll send you a copy of our latest book. It's called Time Now for the Vinyl Cafe Story Exchange. It's a collection of stories from the last decade. We have one today from Honor Mackenzie of Toronto, Ontario. Dear Stuart, writes Honor, my dad discovered the scent of Old Spice in the fall of 1961. He made sure everybody knew what he wanted for Christmas that year. We were a family of immigrants, just the 5 of us in Canada. Dad had joined the Canadian Army in England as a means to immigrate here in 1953. We followed in 1954. He was always hard to buy for, so we were thrilled that year that we were able to buy something that he would honestly enjoy. It was a welcome change from socks and underwear. Had Dad left it at that, telling us about the Old Spice, this story wouldn't exist. But he didn't leave it at that. He told everyone on base Borden what he wanted every chance he got. He went so far to tell his messmates that if they knew who his secret Santa was, please could they tell him too that he wanted Old Spice. Now, Stuart, Soldiers do not do Secret Santa, or they didn't in my dad's day. They may collect money for a charity or even collect gifts to distribute to children in need, or they buy a buddy a drink in the mess. But at some point, someone on the base decided to play into Dad's fantasy. On Christmas morning, we woke early. We had our breakfast. It was a family rule that we had to eat before the gift opening. But by 8 a.m., we were fully immersed in the gift exchange. I don't remember anything I received, but I remember Dad liking the Old Spice soap on a rope that I gave him. My sisters gave him aftershave, and Mum gave him cologne. At 9 a.m., there was a knock on the door. Odd. We had no relatives in Canada. Who could be visiting on Christmas Day? Well, Dad was a military policeman, so our supposition when we heard the knock was that Dad had to go out on a call. It turned out to be a neighbor with a small parcel in hand. The neighbor explained that he had been handing out the gifts from under his own Christmas tree when he came upon a parcel which was, strangely, addressed to my dad. No idea how it got there. The neighbor stayed for a sociable 20 minutes and had a cup of coffee with Dad, spiked with something that wasn't cream, and then Dad opened the gift. Old Spice cologne. Lovely, said Dad. Just what I wanted. As the neighbor left, there was another soldier on the stoop. Monty, I was walking the dog this morning, and it's the darndest thing. I found this wrapped gift lying on the ground, and it's addressed to you. So I took the dog home and came around with it. The wrapping paper was different, but the size was identical to the previous box. Old Spice cologne. Lovely. Just what he'd wanted. What would you like to drink? Said Dad. 20 minutes later, a knock on the door caused the guest to drink up and take his leave as yet a third soldier arrived with a small parcel, the size and shape of which was now familiar. The soldier explained that someone had left the parcel in the mess the night before and it had Dad's name on it, so he thought he should bring it over. This went on every 20 minutes for the rest of the day. The provenance of the gifts was anonymous every time, but we all went along with the joke. Like all good military campaigns, it was time to the second. No man arrived empty-handed, no man stayed longer than 20 minutes, no man left without being offered a drink. And no man brought any gift other than Old Spice cologne. At one point, Mum had to run to a friend's house to see if she had any rye to spare. We had run out. Normally, the bottle purchased for Christmas lasted until sometime in March. Not that year. Our supper-time conversation was full of laughter at the joke that had played out so successfully. We never again bought Dad cologne, but occasionally a new soap on a rope appeared, or talc. And every Christmas, we laughed anew at the 27 bottles received that day. And to this day, neither my sisters nor myself can see the ads or pass a display of the product without a smile on our faces. Dad died in 1982. His teenage grandsons inherited the remaining 2.5 bottles of cologne. That story came to us from Honor Mackenzie of Toronto, Ontario. Well, I told you we had a story for you today, a story about Christmas traditions in Dave's neighborhood. This is Rashida Amir and the Great Gift Giving. In the middle of November, Jim Schofield was cleaning out his attic when he came across a box of children's books he neither recognized nor remembered. He brought them downstairs intending to do what he always does with books he doesn't want. He was going to take them to the library and push them through the return slot. By Friday afternoon, the books had made it as far as his front hall, which is where Jim happened to be standing when he spotted Rashida Chudry pushing her daughter Fatima up the street in her stroller. Rashida and her husband Amir moved into the neighborhood last winter. Everyone took great delight in helping the Chudderys through their first winter in Canada. When it snowed, people woke up all over the neighborhood wishing they could be at the Chudderys to see their reaction. Jim grabbed some wrapping paper from where he keeps it, under the sofa, and he quickly gift-wrapped the books, and then he ran outside. An early Christmas present, he said, handing the children's books to Rashida and pointing at her daughter. Jim said the thing about the books being a Christmas present so Rashida wouldn't think he was odd, running out like that. He gave her the books, and then he went inside to fix dinner, and he forgot about them completely. Rashida didn't, however. Rashida went home and freaked out. Rashida and Amir are from Pakistan, and this was going to be their first Christmas in Canada. Jim clearly said it was an early Christmas present, she told Amir that night when her husband arrived home. Do you know what that means? Amir shook his head disconsolately. It surely means this whole neighborhood gives each other presents. Amir and Rashida spent November in a frenzy of preparation. They assembled elaborate gift baskets for everyone in the neighborhood. Each basket had little packages of aromatic rice and tamarind and homemade chutneys. They stayed up late sewing little cloth bags for the spices. Now, things at Dave and Morley's house were more comfortable in the run-up to Christmas. Morley has been paring back her Christmas responsibilities over the years. She has pruned her shopping list. She doesn't do as much baking as she used to do. Dave cooks the turkey every year now. So this year, as Christmas approached, Morley felt uncommonly sanguine about the season. She felt like she was floating above it, like a swimmer floating in the ocean. She felt such a sense of control that she even sat Dave down one night, and they sent Christmas cards to his Cape Breton relatives. On an impulse, Morley sent a card to Rashida and Amir. By a terrible coincidence, it arrived the morning Rashida and Amir finished making their neighborhood Christmas packages. "Oh my golly," said Amir, "not cards too." Unlike Morley, Dave had been preoccupied with Christmas since the end of November. The neighborhood arena holds an annual skating party every December, and this year they were trying to raise money for a new Zamboni. Dave went to an organizing meeting, and when he went, he knew he wouldn't leave without some responsibility. Before the meeting began, Dave overheard Mary Turlington talking to Polly Anderson. "He flips a few steaks on the barbecue and he thinks he's cooked a meal," she said disparagingly. She was talking about her husband, Bert. "Baking," said Polly Anderson, "that's the final frontier. Show me a man who can bake a cupcake and I'm all his." They both cracked up. At the end of the meeting, the chairman passed a typed list of jobs around the table. Dave looked down the list and without a second thought put up his hand and he said, "I'll bake the Christmas cake." He said it for Bert Turlington. He said it for all the men in the neighborhood. Said it for men everywhere. And that is how, on a Saturday in the middle of November, Dave came to be in his kitchen, surrounded by brown paper bags of sultanas and currants, and lemons and figs and dates and prunes and nuts and glazed cherries, and a giant jug of bourbon. He was wearing a Santa Claus hat. Autumn dimmed, and the rains of November arrived, and the street lights went on earlier each night, and the wind came up, and the leaves blew off the pear tree in the backyard, and it was good to be inside. And inside, at Dave's house, life was sublime. Dave had his cakes wrapped in cheesecloth and aging on a shelf in the basement. 2 or 3 evenings a week, he would head downstairs and sprinkle them with a soaking mixture he made with the bourbon. "It's a very European thing," he said one night. It's like having a goat down there." I don't pretend to understand everything he says. Sometimes on the weekend, Kenny Wong came over and they'd go into the basement and sprinkle the cakes together. On Grey Cup weekend, Dave and Kenny watched the entire game without touching one beer. They sucked on half a fruitcake each. By the middle of December, Dave was ready for the arena big time. His remaining cakes were moist and mature and, truth be told, delicious. Dave had eaten 2 of them. He'd nibbled them both to death. He had the remaining dozen lined up like gold bars in a vault. Amir and Rashida had their gift baskets ready to go too, wrapped in cellophane, tagged and waiting in the front hall. But a sense of anxiety had descended upon the Chudderys. Amir and Rashida didn't know when the neighborhood gifting would begin. Knowing nothing about Christmas traditions, they didn't want to jump the gun. "It wouldn't be right, Amir," said Rashida. "We must wait." And then there was a party at Fatima's daycare, and all the children were given presents. And that night, Rashida said, "I am thinking, Amir, that the gifting has obviously begun. We have not been included because they do not want to make us uncomfortable. If we're going to be part of this neighborhood, Amir, it's up to us to make the first move." Amir thought otherwise, and they had a steamy argument about what to do. But in the end, Rashida said, "I am going tonight, and that is it. If you are coming with me, Amir, you must come tonight." And so they set off after supper, pulling their wagon full of 28 gift baskets. When Rashida handed Morley her Christmas basket, Morley was seized with a spasm of guilt. She was ashamed of herself. She had been working so hard to minimize the hassle of Christmas. And these new neighbors, these new Canadians, had so clearly been embraced by the spirit of the season. She invited them in and she put their basket under the tree, and then she said, "I have your present upstairs." And she flew upstairs, and in a panic she grabbed a lovely glass bowl that she had picked up at a craft show. It was already wrapped, and she'd been planning to give it to her mother. "See," said Rashida to Amir 15 minutes later, as they pulled their wagon along the sidewalk, "they were waiting on us, Amir." It took Amir and Rashida 3 hours, but when they finished, they had left baskets all over the neighborhood. The next morning, Morley noticed a tiny rash in the crook of her elbow, a spot that often flares when she's feeling pressured. While she was drying her hair, she told Dave what was bugging her. "I gave the Chudderys that pretty glass bowl. We've lived right next door to Maria and Eugene for 18 years, and we've never given them anything. And Gerda, too. If I give something to the Chudderys, surely I should give something to Gerda." She could feel the muscles in the back of her neck tightening. As she headed downstairs for breakfast, she was trying to figure out when she'd have time to shop. Morley went to a flower store at lunch, and she bought 2 bunches of holly. She was planning on taking one to Eugene and Maria next door and one to Gerda. She was planning to do it after supper. Before she was ready to leave, the doorbell rang, and there was Gerda, standing on the stoop beside a wagon full of presents. "Christmas cookie," she said. I baked for everyone in the neighborhood." There was a tiny muscle ticking under her left eye. On the weekend, Morley dug through her emergency stash of presents looking for something to give Mary Turlington. "I wouldn't want Mary to learn I'd given something to Gerda and not to her," she said. She found a pair of hand-dipped candles. They were warped. She took them downstairs thinking she could straighten them out if she warmed them in the microwave. You've tried this? After she had scraped out the microwave, Morley dashed to a neighborhood store, arriving just before closing, and she bought a gift basket of herbal teas for Mary. On her way home, she bumped into Diane Goldberg, who was pulling a wagon up the street towards her house. Wagon was full of presents. Morley couldn't believe it. Everybody knew the Goldbergs didn't celebrate Christmas. Morley said, "What a coincidence. I just put something under the tree for you." By the Friday before Christmas, Morley had received 10 gifts from neighborhood families, including 2 baskets of herbal teas identical to the one she had given Mary Turlington. One of them looked like it might have been the exact same basket. Her rash had extended down to the wrist. With only 3 shopping days left, she came home from work and she found a small bottle of strawberry-flavored virgin olive oil from a family down the street she had never met. She stood in the kitchen staring at it, scratching. "Damn it," she said. Unfortunately, that was also the afternoon Dave closed the Vinyl Cafe and came home early to ice his Christmas cakes. His plan was to fit them together like a jigsaw puzzle and seal them with a sugar paste. And when he finished, he realized his cake was now far too big to fit into the fridge, which is where the baker told him it belonged. The only place Dave could think of that was both cold enough and large enough for his icing to set was in the garage. Ever so carefully, he picked the cake up and he struggled out backwards using his elbow to push open the door. And on the way into the garage, he stumbled against the door frame and he knocked one end of the cake and a piece fell off. And Dave headed back into the kitchen and set the cake down on the table and went outside to fetch the broken bit. But the piece was not where it had fallen. Dave looked around the yard, and there, heading up the pear tree backwards, was a squirrel dragging the broken bit of cake in its mouth. Dave squeaked and leapt in the air. The squirrel squeaked and leapt in the air. It dropped the cake and disappeared up the tree. Dave retrieved the piece of cake. He bought it inside and he cut off the bit that he thought had been in the squirrel's mouth. And he tried to set it back in place. But the more he fiddled with it, the more the piece refused to fit. It was rapidly losing its shape. Eventually, using a mixture of honey and icing sugar, Dave made a sort of cement and glued the hunk of cake back on. Used the last of the sugar paste to cover the joint. It was easy. It was just like doing masonry. And then he carried the cake carefully out to the garage, the squirrel nattering at him as he walked under the tree. And he set the cake on the roof of the car. My Buddhist friends would tell you to stay in the present moment. He set the cake on the roof of the car and made sure the garage door was tightly closed on his way back inside. It was an hour later that Morley came home and found the strawberry-flavored olive oil. "Every night," she said, "every night I come home and someone else has left a present. What is wrong with these people?" She was scratching her arm vigorously as she left the room. Dave was sitting at the kitchen table making little marzipan snowmen for his Christmas cake. Morley came back into the kitchen with her coat on, and she looked at Dave and said, "I'm going to the drugstore. Anyone else who shows up here is getting chocolate." And as she flew out the door, she said, "Those look more like mice than snowmen. You can't put marzipan mice on a Christmas cake." Dave waited until she left, and then he flattened the ball of marzipan in his hand and he threw it across the room for Arthur the dog. And then he said, "Uh-oh. This is where I catch up to you." And he jumped up and he ran out the door, and he got to the driveway just in time to hear a squeal of tires, just in time to see the red lights of his car disappearing down the street with his Christmas cake on the roof. He began to run down the street, waving his hands wildly, calling to Morley. He was running and waving when she hit the speed bump and the cake flew off. He was still running and waving when Morley glanced in the rear view mirror and spotted him. "Now what?" she muttered. And she jammed on the brakes, and the car skidded to a halt, and she threw it in reverse, and Dave stopped moving, and he watched in horror as she reversed over his cake. And he started running again, but he wasn't running alone anymore. Pounding along the pavement beside him like a racehorse stretching for the finish line, matching him step for step in a rush for the cake. You got it, the squirrel. "Get out of here," bellowed Dave. Morley thought he meant her. She gunned the car and went right over the cake again. Dave carried his cake home the way he would have carried a dog who'd been run over by a milk truck. You need professional help. He set it down on the kitchen table. He picked a piece of gravel out of the squished part. He got a screwdriver from the basement and a flashlight. He held the flashlight in his mouth and leaned over the cake like a surgeon. It took him 20 minutes to flick out all the gravel he could find. He went into the basement and poured himself a glass of soaking mixture. He came back a half hour later with a solution. He would cut the cake into individual servings and wrap each serving in cellophane like at a wedding. No one would have to know a thing. He got out the cake knife. When Morley came home, Dave had just finished the job. Morley was carrying a large cardboard carton. At first, Dave thought she had gone grocery shopping, but she hadn't. She had bought every box of chocolate miniatures left in the drugstore and a bottle of cortisone cream. The skating party was the next night. Dave took his cake up to the arena an hour early and set it out on the refreshment table by the skate sharpening machine. He wanted to hang around and serve it to people. Fortunately, he had to go back to work and close his store. When he returned an hour later, there was a man standing by the arena door who didn't look at all happy. He was holding his jaw. "Are you okay?" said Dave. Man shook his head. "Some idiot baked a fruit cake and left the pits and the dates." "You're kidding," said Dave. When he got to the table beside the skate sharpening machine, his cake had hardly been touched. Someone, however, had altered the sign he had carefully lettered before leaving home. "May contain nuts," it read. Someone had scratched out the word nuts and written a new word in its place. His sign now read, "May contain gravel." He was going to go home, but he spotted Sam waving at him from the ice, and he thought, who cares? And he waved back, and he held his skates up, and he headed toward the changing room. Christmas Day was a little strained in Dave's neighborhood this year. Gerda Lobier raided her freezer of all her Christmas baking for the cookie plates she gave to everyone. On Boxing Day, old Eugene from next door realized he'd given away the last of the year's homemade wine. Mary Turlington, who prides herself with her detailed Christmas record keeping, got so flustered with the neighborhood gift giving that she completely forgot to buy a present for her husband Bert. I can't believe it, Mary said, scrolling through her Palm Pilot on Christmas morning. I must have deleted you. The only house where Christmas went without a hitch was Jim Schofield's. When Jim's mother arrived, as usual, a few days before Christmas, she was amazed at all the festive flourishes. The candles, the home baking, the Christmas CD. It's all from people in the neighborhood, he told her. I've never seen a Christmas like it. People kept coming to the door with wagon loads full of presents. On Christmas Day, Jim and his mother went for a walk and ran into the Chudleys in the park. And they stopped and they talked for 10 minutes. And Jim's mother made a fuss over Fatima. As they said goodbye, Jim looked at Rashida and said, "What are you planning for New Year's?" New Year's, Amir said as soon as they were alone. New Year's, Rashida, don't these people ever stop? It will be all right, Amir, Rashida said. Inshallah, her husband replied. Inshallah. God grant that it be so. Thank you very much. That was the story we call Rashida, Amir, and the Great Gift Giving. Well, we've been talking about Christmas traditions today on the Vinyl Cafe. Our tradition is the Vinyl Cafe Christmas Tour. We're out on the road right now with this year's Christmas concert, and we still have a few stops to make. We're in Toronto today, and then we're off to Hamilton, Kitchener, London, Ottawa, and Montreal. We're on the road right up until Christmas Eve, so if you live in any of those places, head over to vinylcafe.com to see when we're stopping in your city. Okay, that's it for us today. David Amers, the founding producer of the Vinyl Cafe. Greg DeClute is the recording engineer. Louise Curtis is the production assistant. Julie Penner is the music producer. Meg Masters is my long-suffering editor. The Vinyl Cafe is produced by Jess Milton. I'm Stuart McLean. So long for now.
For more CBC podcasts, go to cbc.ca/podcasts.